Daniel chapter 8, verse 11. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Revelation chapter 13, verse 2. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. The Daily in the Book of Daniel and the New World Order, written by Marion Barry, and copyrighted by Marion Barry in 2002. Table of Contents. Introduction, Globalism and Prophecy. Chapter 1, The Daily Enigma. Chapter 2, The Time of the End Defined. Chapter 3, Past Efforts to Pry Open the Daily. Chapter 4, The Historical Background of Those Who Gave the Judgment Hour Cry. Chapter 5, Paganism Defined. Chapter 6, The Correct View of the Daily. Chapter 7, The Daily Sacrifice. Chapter 8, The Daily Taken Away in Daniel. Chapter 9, The Abomination That Maketh Desolate Defined. Chapter 10, The Grammatical Aspect of the Daily. Chapter 11, The Daily Continuum Illustrated. Chapter 12, The Daily of Daniel, chapter 12, verse 11, in the total context of the book of Daniel. Chapter 13, The Daily Sovereignty of the Nations taken away in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11. Chapter 14, The Daily Power to Rule in the Human Heart. Index for easy reference. In order to guide and support you in the study of the daily, the index for easy reference is highly recommended. It is found at the end of the book. Every chapter offers some extra information as to where you can find certain details regarding, for example, in chapter 1, the words daily was closed up and sealed in Daniel chapter 12, verse 9. And continuing from chapter 2 all the way to chapter 14, you can refer to those pages at the end of the daily book and find further, again, important information that as you read, you may want to refer back often. So we encourage you to use this excellent tool of the easy reference at the end of the book, the daily, in order to hopefully find many answers to the question you have had about this mysterious word daily, especially in the book of Daniel and in the book also explained in the book of Revelation. So we encourage you to refer often to this easy reference at the end of the book, the daily. Introduction, Globalism. The prophet John, who wrote the book of Revelation, saw in vision the end-time one-world government. He referred to it with a religious leader, as it said, as a beast, which, according to Daniel chapter 7, verse 17, represents a king with his kingdom, an empire or government. He wrote in Revelation chapter 13, verses 3, 7, 8, 16, and 17. And all the world wondered after the beast. And it was given him to make war with the saints, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark. John saw an end-time globalization or global governance spoken of as the new civilization or new world order. It is also called a federation of nations. The United Nations, with its current army, as in Bosnia at the time that this book was written, a world banking system known as the International Monetary Fund, IMF, NAFTA, governing world trade with its treaties, and a World Council of Churches or religious initiative are all familiar testimony to the attempted formation of a one-world government, and still in existence today. Although many voices are crying out all over the world against the rising New World Empire, the desire to guard the sovereignty of the USA and other nations is lost in the mighty winds of change. Some congressmen protest, and many of the laboring class violently oppose the New World Order with its federation, constitution, and world court, which would supersede the supreme courts of the nations, regulate foreign policies, and dictate the principles which affect the well-being, freedoms, and prosperity of each and every nation. But, regardless of opposition, a new world order is imposing itself upon every nation and every human being. The fact that the New World Order has been planned for a long time is evidenced in the $1 bill in the United States of America. On the green side of the US dollar bill, there is a seal in which are the Latin words novus for new, ordo for order, seclorum for world, New World Order. It is also a fact that the US dollar has therefore become the hard currency of world trade. Not only did the prophet John see this end-time one-world government arise that he called the beast with its mark of authority, but the prophet Daniel also saw the same scene more than 500 years earlier. Daniel saw the establishment of an end-time empire, which he called the abomination that maketh desolate, and actually predicted how long it would reign over the earth. But Daniel's vision was sealed up, not to be understood until the time of the end. Not until the one-world government was plainly in view was this prophecy to be disclosed or understood. Reading from Testimonies to Ministers, page 117, the books of Daniel and the Revelation should be bound together. Revelation following Daniel as giving fuller light on the subject dealt with in Daniel, showing that both relate to the same subjects. We are to understand that the third angel's message of Revelation chapter 14, which will swell into the Lord cry, was first given as the basic prophecy in Daniel chapter 12, verses 7 to 13. Daniel's visions, which brings to view the daily, contained the basic prophecy that was sealed, closed, or locked up until the end time. Over 500 years later, it was complemented by the revelation of John. The entire vision of the end time, as described in Daniel chapter 12, verses 5 to 12, was to be unlocked with the key word, which is the daily, in Daniel chapter 12. When the daily is understood correctly, it not only gives clear meaning to the last chapter of Daniel, which is chapter 12, but it also reveals the significance of current events in our world today. A flood of light will shine upon events that will occur just before the second coming of Jesus. Testimonies to Ministers, pages 114, 115. The things revealed to Daniel were afterward complemented by the revelation made to John on the Isle of Patmos. These two books should be carefully studied. The book of Daniel involves two lines of emphasis. It is a spiritual view of the actions carried on by Jesus Christ, which are going on in heaven, and this we find in chapter 7 with the interlude when Christ come to the Ancient of Days and the books were opened and the judgments was set. And it is a view of political actions going on down here on earth in the rise and fall of empires that affect the people of God. One view must not be permitted to obscure the other. The desire to present spiritual matters must not crowd out the pointed political statements found in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 to 45, and chapter 12, verse 11. The prophecies of the Bible, as found in the books of Daniel and Revelation, may be likened to a map. Current events are likened to road signs. When traveling on the highways of this confusing world, the map, the prophecies of the Bible, and the road sign, which are the current events, are both needed to understand where we are in the stream of time. It is the map of Bible prophecy which shows us the destination, but it is the road signs of current events which reveal to us how near we are to that destination. Signs of the times everywhere. Seventh-day Adventists have, from their earliest history, seen the papacy as a major actor in the apocalyptic scene of final events. Today, because of the growing geopolitical role of the papacy, there is really only one political superpower, the United States of America, and one religio-political superpower, the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church. Anglican, Lutheran, and we could add Orthodox and other church leaders are now referring to the Pope as the possible leader or symbol of unity for Christianity. There is good reason to believe that the broad lines of the end-time scenario are gradually moving into place. Globality is the necessary precondition for worldwide final event to take place. And this is why we're talking here about an apocalyptic scene of final events. It's very, very sure that something is happening. All parts of the world are now united economically with multinationals, cyber especially with internet, politically with United Nations, international courts of justice, and culturally with the news, entertainment, and media. This was written by Bert B. Beach, Director of Interchurch Relations, Adventist Review, July 2001, page 43. A correct understanding of the daily in the book of Daniel is the key to solve the puzzles or enigmas of many things. It will open up the last chapter of Daniel, chapter 12, give pertinent meaning to the book of Revelation, interpret current events, and motivate the last generation to put on the robe of Christ's righteousness. Beautiful, beautiful words to encourage us to study at this time of Earth history. Passing on to chapter 1 of the book, the Daily Enigma. Daniel chapter 12, verse 9. And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed. The word daily was closed up and sealed. The Lord explained to Daniel that certain words were closed up and sealed. The meaning of the word daily was closed up or locked up as an enigma or puzzle. It was not to be disclosed until the time of the end. For more than 2,500 years, those who have read the book of Daniel struggled to understand the meaning of the word daily. That is why, for more than 2 millenniums, there have been many attempts to define the daily, but there has been much disagreement. The meaning of the word daily was sealed only until the time of the end, and then it was to be disclosed or unsealed to become a key in the end of God's people, so that the last generation might recognize exactly where they are in the stream of time. The meaning of the daily was to become self-evident and clear to those who search the scriptures and love the appearing of the Lord Jesus, because the Lord assured Daniel that the wise shall understand. Daniel chapter 12, verse 10. Chapter 2. The time of the end defined. Reading from Daniel chapter 12, verse 9. And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. The daily was to be disclosed or unsealed at the time of the end. The Lord explained to Daniel that the words, the meaning of the word daily, was to be closed up and sealed till the time of the end. When will the exact meaning of the word daily, as used in Daniel chapter 12, be revealed? According to Daniel chapter 12, verse 9, it was to be disclosed at the time of the end. But there is confusion as to when the time of the end should be. It is therefore necessary to examine the phrase "the time of the end" very carefully in every reference to it in the book of Daniel, to determine exactly how the word daily in Daniel chapter 12, verse 9 was to be understood and applied. The phrase "the time of the end" is found in Daniel chapter 11, verse 35, Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, and Daniel chapter 12, verse 9, which we encourage you to open your Bible even at this time and read these important quotes. The phrase "the time of the end," as used in the book of Daniel, must be defined in each of these 4 settings or contexts, which will be studied in further chapters. The assumption that all 4 of these references to the time of the end in Daniel chapters 11 and 12 must refer to the same time or date is the cause of much error and confusion, because they do not have the same meaning. Looking now at chapter 2, section number 1. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 35, the time of the end was AD 1798. Reading from Daniel chapter 11, verse 35, some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Daniel chapter 11 is an historical prophetic outline. An outline, by nature and purpose, is an orderly, sequential arrangement of data. Therefore, the prophetic expositor must keep in mind the fact that in an historical prophetic outline, each verse in that outline must be kept in strict sequence and must also be matched consistently to the sequence and continuity of historical events. Only when one historical prophetic outline is treated in that orderly manner, can a logical, valid prophetic application be made. We repeat, only when an historical prophetic outline is treated in that orderly manner can a logical, valid prophetic application be made, always matching this outline with what we see here, the prophetic outline, with the events. Reading from Testimonies to Ministers, page 118, advance new principles and crowd in the clear-cut truth. Let Daniel speak, let Revelation speak. So therefore, in this study, we have very, very important principles drawn from Isaiah chapter 28, where we know that we are to study precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little. And these several important new principles will be advanced in this chapter. They will be called hermeneutic principles. And the first one, found here in the book The Daily on page 8, is a very important new hermeneutic principle, which is as follows. In a prophetic historical outline, the sequential order of verses may not be violated. These will be repeated often in the study of the book daily. Number 2, the hermeneutic principle of the imperative of sequence and continuity in the exposition of prophetic outlines. Prophetic outline verses must be kept in strict sequence and matched consistently to the sequence and continuity of historical events. A disregard of the hermeneutic principle enjoining sequence and continuity of verses matched to sequential historical events has resulted in many false applications of prophecy. The phrase, the time of the end, is used 2 times in the 4th historical prophetic outline in the book of Daniel. The phrase, the time of the end, is found in the 4th outline in Daniel chapter 11, verse 35, and again in verse 40 of the same chapter. When each verse in an historical prophetic outline is kept in exact sequence, it can be matched consistently to the sequence and continuity of historical events. Only then can the entire outline be treated in a logical and orderly manner so that Daniel chapter 11 verses 35 and 40 can be placed into their correct historical time frames. And here we have on page 9 the hermeneutic principle number 3. Context is king, and it's the hermeneutic principle of historical context. Truth out of its setting is error. And many times we say that a text out of context is a pretext, which is also an error. The historical context of Daniel chapter 11 verse 35, reading from Daniel chapter 11 verses 33 and 35 excerpts. They shall fall by the sword and by the flame, by captivity and by spoil many days, 1260 days of years. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge them, and to make them white, even to the time of the end. The context of the historical prophetic outline of Daniel chapter 11 verses 32 to 35 is referring to the time of persecution, when men fell by the sword, or were tried, or imprisoned, or burned at the stake. That period of persecution occurred under what is known as the papal supremacy, which would have been the first one, which reigned over Europe in the medieval era from AD 538 to 1798. And here we have again the repetition, but in a kind of a graphic, AD 538 to AD 1798, which gives 1260 years. Therefore, the time of the end in Daniel chapter 11 verse 35 refers to the end of the 1260 years dated AD 1798. B. Language context also determines meaning. There are many forms of context: historical and circumstantial context are one form of context. The very structure of the book of Daniel is another form of context. Verses before and after a text are referred to as contextual. So we have big words here. Circumstantial context. Then, of course, we have the book of Daniel, the very structure of it. And then we have contextual. Those are type of context. There is an hermeneutic principle that need to be advanced. The context of literal and symbolic language as found in the historical prophetic outlines in Daniel and Revelation give correct placement to the time of the end. If an historical prophetic outline is couched in the symbolism of beast, heads, horns, eyes, mouth, sea, winds, etc., then any time element mentioned in context, anytime element mentioned in connection with such a symbolic context must be considered as symbolic time. So when we have symbolism, we have a symbolic time, which is to be decoded by the yearly principle. The context of language is also important because truth, as we saw, out of its setting, is error. And this brings us to another hermeneutic principle, the hermeneutic principle of language context. So this would be number 4. We choose to number them to make it easier. Context determines whether a timeline is given in literal or symbolic language. According to the Greek Controversy, page 599, the language of the Bible is to be understood in its most obvious or literal meaning unless a figure or symbol is employed. This persecution, which we spoke about earlier, carried on by the papacy from AD 538 to 1798, was prophesied in the timeline of Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, where it is couched in the symbolic language of beast, heads, horns, etc. A timeline in the context of such a symbolic language is therefore considered to be symbolic language also and must be decoded by the yearly principle as found in Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 6 and the book of Numbers chapter 14 verse 34. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 says, "And he, the symbolic little horn, shall think to change times and laws, and they, the saints, shall be given into his hand until a symbolic time, times, and the dividing of time, or for 1260 symbolic days, which refers to the 1260 literal years of papal supremacy from AD 538 to 1798. An important note: they are examples of prophecies which contain symbolic language, but an immediate biblical interpretation of the symbolism translates the symbol in their symbolic setting into literal meaning. For example, Daniel chapter 4 verses 10 to 17 contains the symbolism of a tree, and in verse 16 presents a 7 times prophetic timeline. However, the interpretation of the dream decodes the symbolism into its literal meaning and specifies in verse 23 of Daniel chapter 4 that 7 literal years were to pass over him. The same situation is found in Revelation chapter 20 verse 1, wherein the key and chain and the dragon are all symbols, but interpretation immediately follows in Revelation chapter 20 verse 2, interpreting the symbolic dragon to be the literal devil, which will be bound by a literal 1,000 years prophetic timeline. It should be remembered that it is the Bible, and the Bible only, which is the interpreter of biblical symbolism. Again, we're bringing in an hermeneutic principle. The Bible is its own expositor of symbolism, which is found here on page 12 of the book The Daily, and that makes it number 5 as an hermeneutic principle. Chapter 7 of Daniel, with its context of symbolic beast, demands that the times, and the dividing of time be kept in its proper symbolic setting of 1260 symbolic days. There is no inspired comment that permits the prophetic expositors to give Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 a dual application, or to remove its timeline from its symbolic setting. It is a Jesuit technique that interchanges symbolic and literal language to create the contemptible practices of futurism, meaning putting it all in the future, and preterism, meaning putting it in the past. Such violation of hermeneutic principle eventually bring about confusion. The Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 timeline of 1260 literal years of papal supremacy and persecution began in AD 538 and ended in AD 1798, when Napoleon took the Pope prisoner and carried him off to France, where he died, through his general Berthier, according to history. Therefore, the time of the end in Daniel chapter 11 verse 35 refers only to the specific date of AD 1798 and may not be taken out of context to refer to any other time, previous or future. To take anything out of its correct context is to violate hermeneutic principle, logical prophetic application of historical prophetic timelines, and generally muddy the waters. It is not wise to apply a verse outside of its true context, even though it may seem supportive of a good matter, because in the long run, integrity is vital to truth, and truth, as we remember now this hermeneutic principle, out of its setting, out of its context, is error. C. The time of the end in Daniel chapter 11 verse 35 in AD 1798 was a time appointed by the 1260 timeline of Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. Daniel chapter 11 verse 35, some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. What does Daniel chapter 11 verse 35 say that the time of the end, or 1798, was for a time appointed? Timelines begin and end with specific events which are foretold or appointed by prophetic utterances. These historical events are often legal decrees. The 7 timelines in the book of Daniel begin and end at specific dates of appointed times. For example, the 2300-year timeline in Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 began with the commandment or decree issued to the Jews to return to rebuild the city of Jerusalem in 457 BC, and that is found in history by Artaxerxes. And in like manner, the Daniel chapter 8 verse 14 timeline of 2300 years ended at an appointed date in AD 1844. Also, the 1260-year timeline began in AD 538 and ended at the appointed date of AD 1798. In parenthesis, those commandment or decree are either heavenly or earthly, and yet they fulfill the will of the Heavenly Father. In the Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 to 27, the 70 weeks timeline with its prophetic periods regarding the Messiah's ministry, his death, and the ending of the Mount Sinai covenant with Israel were all fulfilled on specific preset dates of appointed times as prophesied. Therefore, in conclusion, the time of the end in Daniel chapter 11 verse 35 was for a time appointed, referred to the ending of the 1260 days of years timeline of Daniel chapter 7 verse 25, and to the specific date of AD 1798. It was shortly after AD 1798 that those who participated in the Great Advent movement began to unseal or disclose the meaning of the daily correctly as is used in Daniel chapter 8. In the next study, we will continue with chapter 2 and looking now at section 2, Daniel chapter 11 verse 40. The time of the end refers to the latter days or end time of earth history. As mentioned, there are more than one the time of the end in the book of Daniel, and they do not necessarily refer to all the same timeline, and especially the ending of it. Again, in revision, very important study that is brought to this wonderful study of the book of the daily are the hermeneutic principle. Number 1 is found on page 8 in the book The Daily, and it is in a prophetic historical outline. The sequential order of verses may not be violated. This is the first hermeneutic principle. Now, as we look at the next one, the imperative of sequence and continuity in the exposition of prophetic outlines. Prophetic outlines verses must be kept in strict sequence and matched consistently to the sequence and continuity of historical events. This we number 2, found on page 9. The next hermeneutic principle, also found on page 9, is the hermeneutic principle of historical context. Context is king. Truth out of its setting is error. The next hermeneutic principle, which is found in page 11 of the daily, which we number 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 thus far. And it's the hermeneutic principle of language context. Context determines whether a timeline is given in literal or symbolic language. From the Great Controversy, page 599, the language of the Bible is to be understood in its most obvious literal meaning unless a figure or symbol is employed. Again, we found those hermeneutic principles on page 8, 9, 11, and now we are passing to This one, which would be numbered number 5, the Bible is its own expositor or symbolism. The Bible is its own expositor of symbolism. Again, we have 5 principles now found on page 8, 9, 11, and 12. Because on page 9, you will find 2 of those hermeneutic principles. Until the next study, may the Lord bless you and cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace always. And remember to revise this important study that we have done so far of the book of the daily, including the introduction, chapter 1 and chapter 2, but do not go as far as the end of chapter 2, only where we have studied it presently. May the Lord bless you.